Hello, hello, hello. I am the Linux Mitch. The other day, I did a video on Ubuntu, their flagship distribution that's based on the Gnome desktop. And I was on a little bit of the negative side, maybe a little too critical. And I also forgot to mention some things. So I'm going to do a short part 2 video on it. So let's get to it. So I'm in a virtual machine of Ubuntu with the Gnome desktop. And a viewer that watched the video asked if the clock at the top, and I believe he meant this pull down menu, if it can be made larger. And I looked around and I didn't see anywhere in the settings where it could be larger. And I'm not sure if it's a Gnome thing or an Ubuntu thing. But I did find this. You could go into the settings. Then you would go down into accessibility. And you would click on large text. So you're going to toggle this on. And that's going to make the clock a little larger. And it's going to make this stuff up here a little larger. So you have that. You have that. So that makes it a bit larger. Everything larger. You have your pull down menu here. And so forth. But I think it also makes the web browser a little larger as well. Let's open up Firefox. Yes, and it makes your web browser and it's going to make your other applications a bit larger. And of course, in this menu, and I think I showed this in the other video, you go into settings, go into appearance, this icon size, you can make the bar on the side larger. Oops. Let's make that big. Or you can make it smaller. Like that. But I couldn't find anywhere in the settings where you can actually change the font. In most desktop environments, in the Cinnamon desktop environment, and in many other desktop environments, you can actually go in and change the font. For instance, in the Cinnamon desktop environment, your bar is on the bottom, but you can move it to the side or the top, like you can with this one as well. But in the Cinnamon desktop environment, you can make the bar small or large, and you can make the font larger or smaller. You have many different sizes. You can make it bold. You can change the type of font. It's very flexible in the Cinnamon desktop environment. Now, the thing about Gnome is known for not being a very flexible desktop environment. Basically, it is what it is. It is, you get what it is. The other thing I want to mention too is that in window managers, like Qtile, an awesome window manager, you can also make the font many different sizes, or bold or regular, or pick the type of font that you want. But like I said, the thing about Gnome Desktop, it's not known for being very customizable. It's hardly customizable at all. And the other thing is too, is that this version of Ubuntu is based on the Gnome Desktop, and the Gnome Desktop is known for being heavy on RAM. So in my last video, I talked about how heavy this was on RAM, that it was using 1 gigabyte of RAM, and they made a big deal about it. And I don't know if you watched to the end of the video or not, but my last video on Ubuntu, somewhere near the end before my concluding remarks, I flashed into an extremely base virtual machine of Arch Linux in the TTY, and I brought up top and showed how it was only using, I think, 98 megs of RAM or 110 megs of RAM, and I made a big deal about it. And then I went back into my Ubuntu distribution and showed how it was using a gig of RAM, and I made a big deal about it. I was kind of mocking Ubuntu. So that was really unfair because I had logged into, just for a moment, I had logged into a base distribution of Arch Linux in the TTY. So when you're in the TTY, you have nothing opened. And there's no graphical, GUI. There's no GUI or anything open. So it's going to be light. Now, the thing is that this distribution right now is using about a gig of RAM. That's because of the Gnome desktop. It's not really because of Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu and Debian do use more RAM than Arch Linux or an Arch-based distribution. For some reason, I don't know why, but Arch Linux and the Arch-based distributions use less RAM than Debian or Ubuntu. Maybe 200 megabytes less of RAM, which is really not a lot in the scheme of things. So the reason why this is heavy in using a gig of RAM is mainly because it's the Gnome desktop. And the Gnome desktop is known for using a lot of RAM, regardless of whether you're using the Gnome desktop on Arch Linux, Debian, or Ubuntu. So I was kind of being a little unfair in my last video. I was kind of surprised in my last video that Ubuntu didn't have HTOP installed by default, and I installed it myself. But another thing I was planning to talk about and I forgot, and it surprises me, is that this distribution didn't come with a firewall. Now, most Linux distributions come with uncomplicated firewall installed by default, but they're turned off. So when you install Linux Mint, regardless of whether it be Linux Mint Debian or Linux Mint Ubuntu, you have to go into the settings and turn on the firewall if you want it turned on. And the same thing with Manjaro. When you install Manjaro, you have to go in and turn on the firewall. Now, if you installed Arch Linux on your own, then you're going to have to install the uncomplicated firewall and turn it on yourself. Now, if you installed Arch Linux and used my scripts and my configurations, uncomplicated firewall will be installed and turned on if you used my configuration scripts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and install uncomplicated firewall. So I'm going to have to put my password in, hit enter. And first, what I'm going to do is go to the software center. And now I have to remember how to get there. I think this is it. Oh, this is the Ubuntu Software Center. I'm going to do a search for uncomplicated firewall. And it comes up. I'm just going to click it on. I just want to see if this is a snap. Developer is verified. I'm not sure if this is a snap or not. Well, it says source snap. I guess this is a snap. I don't know. But what I'm going to do is a search for GUFW, because the GUFW is the one with the GUI. Now, in Arch Linux, in my Arch Linux, the one I use on my main system, I'm going to look for GUFW, because Ubuntu is supposed to be an easy-to-use distribution, and it's supposed to be a distribution that works with the GUI. So let's see if they have it here. Oops, I guess I got to click this on. Okay, there. So GUFW. So this is the one that works with the GUI. You don't have to set it up in the terminal. So let's just click it on. Oh, it's potentially unsafe, provided by a third party. Oh, I don't know. Okay. Well, you know what? Let's just install it. Let's put the password in. I was thinking for a second I should just go into the terminal and install it with sudo apt install gufw. But let's do it this way. And I think it probably takes longer to install it this way because installing things in the terminal is a lot faster. And looks like it's done. Let's close this. Let's see if we can open it. And you know what? I'm going to go back into the settings. I'm going to make that bar a little wider. Oh, that's better. So let's go here. There it is. So what you want to do is turn that on. It's going to ask for the password. And I highly recommend that you install the firewall and use it. Now it's saying there's a problem. System program problem. I don't know what that is. So let's turn it on. And it's on. That's it. That's all you have to do. And I'm going to close the settings. And I'm just going to go back there, make sure that it's still on. It's going to ask for my password. And there, the firewall is on. So if you're using Ubuntu, now I don't know why the firewall is not there, installed by default. I don't know if that's an Ubuntu thing or a Gnome desktop thing, because I've never really lived in Ubuntu or used Ubuntu. I've only installed it a couple times and played with it, and that's it. And also, I've never used a Gnome desktop. I've installed the Gnome desktop several times and played with it maybe 3-4 times. I've installed Gnome desktop on Vanilla Arch. I've installed Gnome desktop in Manjaro, and now I've installed Gnome desktop in this Ubuntu. But I've never really used it, and I've never really played with it. So I don't know if the reason why the firewall is not installed by default, if that's an Ubuntu thing or a Gnome thing. But regardless, I highly recommend that you install the firewall and turn it on. So that was just a short video to clarify a few things about Ubuntu and its flagship distribution with the Gnome desktop. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. I am the Linux Mensch.